All right, I've got just a few thoughts for you to share with you today. This is our first Master of Divinity Spiritual Formation Chapel, and we usually have 4 of these a semester, and these are recorded and they're posted on YouTube, as well as there's a class put together for the MDiv students for spiritual formation where they have the chance, whether they're on campus or not, to be able to talk about these chapels together and collectively bash the chapel talk or praise it, or a little bit of both usually. So these talks usually fit into the category of things that need to be talked about, but they don't necessarily neatly fit into the curriculum, okay? But in terms of academic curriculum, they're very much a part of the spiritual curriculum and the practical curriculum. So there's things that need to be thought about, and in particular, financial matters for ministry. You know, I don't know about you, but I don't really care anything about money. And that's actually, you know, there's 2 ways to hear that, okay? I'm setting you up. Sometimes that's used as a badge of ministry. Oh, no, I don't care about ministry. I'm so spiritual. But there's a flip side to that. That means you can be very negligent over here. Do you see what I'm saying? And not caring about money is like saying, how would you feel if I came up to you and said, "Oh, you don't care about money? Wonderful. Well, I'm pretty good with money. I tell you what, if you'll let me manage your money, I'll keep half of it and I'll manage the other half for you." Now, that's how money management works. Did you know that? There's a lot of people out here who say, "Oh, you don't like money? Well, let me handle that for you. I'll keep half and then I'll work with the other half for you." Deal? And most of us say, "Sure." Why? Because I don't care about money. Well, that just means you need to work double the hours to meet the expectations that you have, like eating, okay? Those totally unspiritual things like eating and taking baths and driving a car, you know. So anyway, what usually happens is when we start talking about retirement, those of us who don't care about money just kind of zone out, right? I remember a few years ago, and I'm actually advocating this, because I don't care about money, I made a commitment with myself as a discipline every Friday to spend 1 hour per week making sure I research and study money. Okay? Sounds bizarre, doesn't it? I kind of had to make it a task that I would do. And I'm not talking about the bills are due. So the 1 hour doesn't mean I sit down and do bills for an hour, and then other than that, I just spend money. No, you have to do the other stuff anyway, but I thought, you know what? I can't find enough motivation to be interested in this, but yet it has such a huge bearing upon my life. I'll take a little bit of time. And I started doing this a few years, and it's been a very positive thing, and so I advocate that for you. So what is it you think about when you think about retirement? Let's see if we can get this working. Travis, I may need you to come do Remote 101 again. I don't care about technology either.
The little mousy pointer has to be. This one.
See, every now and then you do need somebody with a graduate degree in mousy pointer to help out.
Well, the little mousy pointer has to be on that screen. You got to click twice. However, I think that we're not using this remote anymore.
Okay. Well, let's just do it manually. Is that okay? Yeah. Michael Payton. Combined name. So we'll just do it manually. Is that okay? Okay. Is this retirement? You know. Now, for those who are not yet in retirement, yeah, that is a beach. Yes, we would love for that to be retirement, okay? But the sun will set in about 3 minutes, okay? And then there's your moment, okay? Now, what do you do with the rest of your time? Let's go to the next slide. Is that retirement for you? Yeah, I like to look at that beach too. You know, they're really selling me a beach, I think. Okay. Let's look at the next one. There we go. There's 30 seconds of retirement for you right there, you know. What I'm trying to get at is these are nice images that we portray of retirement, but there's actually a whole lot of time involved in it. You see what I'm saying? And these are fleeting, wonderful moments fleeting, wonderful moments that you may experience. Let's go to the next image. But this is also retirement. A lot of time working if you haven't been able to set aside the money for retirement. You follow what I'm saying? So, I remember being super spiritual as I am. I remember thinking, well, I don't need a retirement. My retirement's in heaven. Right? And I guarantee you, if you don't care about retirement, you will get to go to heaven sooner because you can't feed yourself or you can't pay medical bills. But the flip side of that is when it finally occurs to you that, oh, wow, I might actually cut my ministry life 20 years short because I am so super spiritual. You see what I'm saying? Now, I'm kind of speaking jokingly about a number of these things, and, but there's the part about, let's go to the next slide. We can only tolerate that so much, the greater. There's another part about this too, which is you're committing your life to a life of ministry, but however, what happens when the brotherhood is not ready to commit in you for ministry? You see what I'm saying? You know all there is to know about Scripture. You've studied everything, but guess what? They're just not interested in you. For what reasons? And well, you start listing off all the reasons, and you're thinking, that's so superficial. Well, it may be superficial, but they're still not going to pay your bills, and you've got to eat. Retirement comes in all shapes, forms, and fashions. In retirement, it is wonderful if you have a chance to take your family to the beach, but that's a week, and you walk on the sand with them. But what are you going to do the rest of the time? I have seen people who have lived in retirement, and they live longer than they expected, and they're eating canned goods, and they're eating out of the pantry that the preacher originally was putting together to feed people in the community. But yet they had been reduced to the point that they were eating out of the pantry themselves and trying to do it quietly because it was hard. It was very difficult. If you really want to reduce retirement down and oversimplify it in healthcare, it's how in the world do we plan ahead in such a way that we can meet the expenses that have to be met in life for all of our life. All of our life. There's a number of different scenarios that all of us will end up visiting. Either you will be able to pay your bills when you're not employable for ministry, or you're going to be asking a lot of people for help. That's what comes of it. You'll go to family members, you'll go to your kids, or whoever it may be. So if you're wanting to be prepared, what I'm actually advocating is that we care enough about our finances so that as we age, as we face health obstacles, that we put a little thought into it and be prepared for it. And it's not only good for us, and it's not really about so we can take more walks on the beach, okay? That's a wonderful perk, but it's about living day-to-day life, okay? And so here's just a few thoughts. Obviously, in the next 10 minutes, we're not going to cover the subject. I'm really trying to give an invitation to you to think about the subject. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, $1 a day. If you started saving $1 a day, and I'll just put it this way. I was talking to a group of Boy Scouts last week, and I said to them, if you put back $1 a day, starting now at your age, and you invest it wisely, and you do that until retirement age, how much money are you going to have? Just $1 a day. It's going to be $500,000. $500,000. Isn't that something? So let's translate that into this setting. What if you put $1 a day? Well, if you did $3 a day, that's about $100 a month. Just $100 a month. If you look at it down the road, very easily becomes $500,000. But it takes the discipline to put it away. Now, what's the $500,000 for? The $500,000 is not so that you can take your family to the beach at $7,000 every year for the next 20 years, right? Now, if you break down $500,000, let's say you live on $50,000 a year, right? $50,000, that pays for all the bills of your family, insurance, mortgage, whatever it may be. that means you have 10 years to live on it. You see what I'm saying? Now, let's say you're retired at 65 and you're in pretty good health and you would just love to live to 85 or 90 doing ministry. Well, $500,000 won't cut it. You see what I'm saying? We're talking about expenses here. That's what we're talking about. But what I do want to impress upon you right now is that you don't have to be rich in order to save. You just have to be willing to buy one less Coke, one less latte. You see what I'm saying? Just here and there. Every day you could actually think about it as a trade-in. Man, I would love to get that burrito, but you know what? I'm going to not get that burrito today, and I'm going to take the $2 and stuff it in my pocket, and then we're going to go put it in an account. And at the end of the year, we'll take that account and we'll put it in an IRA. You see what I'm saying? You don't have to have a grand strategy about it. It's just a basic attitude of thriftiness at the baseline. Let's go to the next slide. So a penny saved is penny earned. Thank you. Who said it? Who said a penny saved is a penny earned? Anybody know? Who said it? Who said a penny saved is a penny earned? Thank you, Ben Franklin. All right. I want to make sure our education system is holding up on us here. And it's fairly true. Go ahead. You're going to add a harmonism. Right. That's right. And so let's translate it until today. Let's go ahead and steal his. So what am I telling you? $1 saved is $1 earned. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. If you're wanting to start devoting that 1 hour a week to learning something about finances so you can be responsible and take care of your family or your future family. In fact, if you don't have a family yet, now is the best time to start paying for your family. You see what I'm saying? Because you're sitting there thinking, oh, I don't need 100 extra bucks. Well, you will. So go ahead and stuff it back. Start with financial peace. This is sort of a good little book, Finances 101. And the main issue that some of you may be dealing with, the most immediate concern is going to be school debt. School debt. And so you may be paying on it a long time. I'm still paying. I've got at least 7 more years. And so this is one of those books that'll kind of help whip you into shape. I've got a couple more books. Let's go to the next slide. You keep reading. You read Financial Peace. You get it all down. You want to read something else. Now, don't let the name or the picture deceive you. More Wealth Without Risk is a very straightforward, read a page a day type of a book. What do you mean by that? This is the guy who will help you identify where you're wasting your money. That's the first thing he'll do. And then he'll eventually walk you through, once you've quit wasting that money, here's probably what you ought to do with it responsibly. Okay? So it's a pretty good book when you look at just all of the nuts and bolts of it. This one will take you a lot longer to read, okay? So you may end up skimming some of the sections, but it's an excellent resource for you to just try to think through money issues. Now, once you're done with that book, here's another resource. If you have given up hope on learning about finances, then you need to go to the Motley Fools, and they will very quickly add a lot of humor to finances. So you may want to read this one before More Wealth Without Risk so that you don't taper off too quickly. This is kind of, excuse me, Nathan Daly, this is kind of like you read Genesis and you're excited about it, and then More Wealth Without Risk is like Deuteronomy, you just kind of fizzle out. So this one, you have more than you think. Excellent little book for you to read as well. And it just kind of walks you through some of the nuts and bolts of how to be fiscally responsible. Next slide. Things, if you have not thought about them, write these down. Think about debt in a home. Retirement accounts, typically called IRAs. Think about life and auto insurance, health insurance, and go ahead and be thinking about long-term care. Long-term care. Once you reach the point where you need long-term care, it's going to cost you, right now, it's going to be somewhere around $6,000 a month. $6,000 a month just for the care that will be provided. And so you can start doing the math pretty fast and to determine how much money you're putting out. I've seen families liquidate everything in a period of just a few months because they couldn't afford that type of thing. So anyway, that's all I'll say about that. But you really need to put some thought into this as a minister, okay? All right, next thing. Next slide. Sort of a basis. There's a number of passages you could look at in Scripture, but the one that we read a minute ago is pretty good. Proverbs 6:6-8. Go to the ant, you lazy bones. I like that one there. You sluggard is the way most of us know it. Consider its ways and be wise without having any chief or officer or ruler. It prepares its food in summer and gathers its sustenance in harvest. How long will you lie there, O lazy bones? When will you rise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed warrior. You know, used to when I read this, I read it as an exhortation to not be lazy. And that's a good exhortation, and I think it's there. But the punchline is at the bottom of it. Poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed warrior. Because when whatever it is happens, you know, you're going to be driving down the road or could be driving down the road and something happens, and then 3 days later somebody shows up and hands you a bill for $600,000. And you're like, I can't pay for that. And they're going to look at you and say, I don't care. You're going to pay for it. You see? And then all of a sudden you're thinking, finances matter, finances matter. And so, you know, the general proverb, and I would read all the proverbs, is to have a basic disposition to prepare yourself to handle what comes in life so that you can be most effective for God. Believe me, if you're having to spend all your time figuring out how to pay that bill, you are not spending your time doing what you're passionate about doing. You love God and you love people, and that's what you want to do, but guess what you're doing instead? You're doing a fundraiser of sorts for $600,000. You see what I'm saying? There's where the rubber meets the road. And the last thing, let's go to the next slide. I think we're out of slides. Is there's a basic idea that what we're doing is being prepared. And I'll tell a short story, and I know I've told this before in different settings, so forgive me if you've heard it before. It has to do with my family and where some of the story of our family. When my granddad, John Henry Barrier, he was a farmer, and he was married to Evelyn, and they had 4 children, and he was getting into it as rapidly as he could and trying to grow the farm and trying to take care of everything that needed to be taken care of. And my dad said that he remembered he was I think he was about 9 years old. Or maybe he was 11, one or the other. But this would have been around 1959, 1960, 1961. And his mother was about to take him and his 3 younger siblings to a picture show for the first time in town, you know. And so they loaded up and they were headed off into town to go see something. And while they were gone, Dad was taking care of business, and he was driving down the road, and a dump truck hit him head on and changed everything. At that point, J.H., as he went by, was then taken to Memphis. He was a veteran when he could get health care in Memphis at the VA hospital. And he spent over a year in recovery from that wreck. And he had not been very faithful to God up to this point in his life. He was not ignorant of God. He had just not been committed or faithful. So as he lay there in a bed, he promised God that if God would allow him to live, then he would change it. He would change things. Now, the part about this that was difficult was once he recovered, recovery meant being paralyzed from the neck down. And he could still use his upper arms, but he didn't really have the use of any fingers. So what that meant was he was going to be living in Memphis. He spent the next 40 years living in Memphis. Now imagine you're laying there promising God that you'll make all the commitments that you'll make to Him, and what you thought those commitments would be I promise I'll take my kids to church. No, JH, you won't. I promise I will read my Bible daily. No, JH, you can't. I promise I'll pray. Well, he can do that, can he? So there's a lot of learning that was going to have to take place, but his chance to mirror the image of God to his family had been taken. So he had to figure out a way to do it differently than what he thought he was going to be doing. He did make a life for himself, and he did have a good relationship with his kids and his family, and maintained that as best he could, and they still got to see each other from time to time. And so when I came into the world, I grew up knowing my granddad as well. And so sometime around the year 1995, his health was continuing to go down, and he had several complications, and he was forced at that point to live on a respirator. And so he had a tube in his throat, and he couldn't really speak anymore, but he could just mouth the words. So the health care in a situation like that, my parents were concerned as well as their siblings, because he really needed constant attention. It could not be offered at the facilities where they were located. So at that point, my dad started cashing in on vacation. And about 3-4 days a week, he would go to Memphis, and when my mother could go with him, they would. And they would spend 3-4 days in Memphis, and 2 of their 4 teenage children would run the house. There's another story right there. And so Joey and I were at home. Our older 2 siblings were already out of the house. And so they were doing their very best to take care of him. Well, finally, one thing would happen after another, and he was not able to build his health. His health was really steadily declining. And then one day, his kidneys failed. And at that point, JH just looked at his son and said, look, we're not going to start doing dialysis and going through all this. There have been so many complications at this point. It's been a real trial as it is over the past year. Let's just call it. Let's call it right here. So at that point, they could now not plot it down to weeks and months. They could plot it down to hours. And so JH and my dad were talking. And as you can imagine, my dad had lots of questions, especially when you've got 2 kids who just entered college and 2 who are still in the house. One of the most chaotic points of life, where you're stretched in every direction. And so he's there taking care of his dad, and he's asking questions, and they're talking and just discussing everything. And at one point, JH looks up at him and he says something to him. My dad can't make out what he said. And so my dad leans forward and asks him to say it again. And he looks at my dad and he says, "Are you okay?" And that kind of just threw my dad for a loop. Because he thought he was there to take care of him. But he suddenly realized, wait, it's really the other way around, isn't it? You see, JH had been through a trial, a very difficult trial early in his life. And when he set his face toward Jerusalem, he said it. And he lived a life of ministry in that hospital. And he lived it all the way up to this very moment. And this moment where he was right now was not a new place for him. He had had multiple occasions where he had so-called, quote, died on the operating table. And they had brought him back, So he didn't feel like he was in unexplored territory. What he learned that was so pivotal early in his life and had continued to sustain him was exactly what we read in Scripture. You must prepare yourself for life and ministry, and if you will do it, you are preparing yourself for tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next decade, and it prepares you all the way up to the very threshold of death, and you are prepared. He was not afraid to cross over. He was worried about his son, who was still trying to manage life, and he wanted him to be okay. So when I tell you, you need to be thinking about health care and retirement, what I'm really saying is you need to give some real thought, some real sincere time to thinking about not your life of ministry, but your entire life, all the way up to the moment when you cross over to see God. And you need to put together a plan with that in mind that will prepare you for every moment leading up to that. And that does involve thinking about health care, and it involves thinking about retirement, and it does thinking about the next program you're going to launch next week, you see? But you've got to start investing some real serious time into thinking about how you will prepare yourself for service to God through life and through death. I hope you'll spend some time thinking about that, and I hope this has been encouraging to you.